There's a lot of confusion around sexual attraction, especially when people reduce it to cliches, confidence tricks, or surface-level flirting. But real attraction is far more restrained, far more psychological, and honestly far more revealing than most people realize. When a man is sexually attracted to you, it doesn't usually show up as boldness right away. It shows up as attention, as control, as a quiet recalibration of how he moves, speaks, and positions himself around you. And if you know what to look for, the signs are remarkably consistent because they're rooted in biology, psychology, and evolutionary instinct, not modern dating advice. In this talk, we're going to break down 5 signs, not to manipulate anyone, but to understand what genuine attraction actually looks like when it's real, grounded, and intentional. Because clarity isn't about power over others, it's about understanding the dynamics you're already standing inside. When a man is sexually attracted to you, the first thing that changes is not his confidence level, not his flirtation style, and not even his words. What changes first is heist attention, and not the casual, wandering kind of attention that people give to anything mildly interesting, but a focused, intentional attention that has direction and weight to it. This is important because most people are taught to look for attraction in obvious signals, compliments, texting frequency, bold moves. But those are secondary behaviors. They come later, if they come at all. A more fundamental shift happens internally, and it shows up externally in subtle but consistent ways. His attention stops being passive and starts becoming selective. Psychologically, attention is not neutral. What you attend to is what you value, and what you value is what you begin to organize yourself around. So when a man's attention becomes intentional, what that really means is that you've entered his internal hierarchy. You are no longer just part of the background noise of his environment. You become something his nervous system is tracking. You'll notice it in how he listens, not performative listening, where someone waits for their turn to speak, but a kind of listening where your words land. He remembers details you didn't expect him to. He references things you said days or weeks ago, not because he's trying to impress you, but because they actually registered. That's a sign that his mind slowed down enough around you to absorb information. And that only happens when interest is real. You'll also notice that his reactions to you become more calibrated. He becomes aware of how his words land. He adjusts. He may become slightly more restrained, not less. This surprises people because they assume sexual attraction makes men reckless or impulsive. Sometimes it does, but more often, genuine attraction introduces self-monitoring. He doesn't want to destabilize the interaction. He doesn't want to misstep. That caution is not insecurity, it's valuation. Philosophically speaking, this is where desire and meaning intersect. When someone matters to you, you become careful with reality around them. You pay attention to consequences. You notice nuance. You stop acting purely on impulse and start acting with orientation. In that sense, intentional attention is the first sign that attraction has crossed from biology into psychology. Another place this shows up is in how he positions you socially. He notices where you are in a room. He notices who you're talking. Not in a jealous or possessive way, necessarily, but in an orienting way. His awareness tracks you. If you leave, he registers it. If you arrive, the room subtly changes for him. That's not romance, that's neurology. His attention system has flagged you as relevant. And relevance is everything. Men don't allocate sustained attention without a reason. Attention costs energy. It costs focus. It requires restraint. So when you notice a man consistently directing attention toward you, especially when there is no obvious reward or immediate payoff, that's a strong indicator that attraction is present beneath the surface. What's interesting is that this kind of attention often comes with containment. He doesn't immediately sexualize the interaction. He doesn't rush to label it. He doesn't push. Instead, there's a sense of holding something back. That restraint is often misinterpreted as disinterest, especially in a culture that equates desire with immediacy. But psychologically, restraint is often the opposite of indifference. It's a sign that the person wants to preserve the possibility. There's also an ethical dimension here that often goes unnoticed. When attraction is purely physical, attention can be scattered, intrusive, or objectifying. But when attraction is intentional, attention becomes respectful. He notices your boundaries. He responds to them. He may even test them lightly, not to violate them, but to understand where they are. This is how human beings orient themselves towards something they don't want to damage. And this is where your role becomes crucial. Intentional attention is an invitation, not a guarantee. It creates a space where something could develop, but it doesn't force anything. Your response to that attention determines whether it deepens or dissipates. If you reward attentiveness with clarity and self-respect, it tends to strengthen. If you respond with inconsistency or performative indifference, it often destabilizes the dynamic. This isn't about playing games. It's about recognizing that attention seeks coherence. When someone directs focus toward you, they are subconsciously asking, is this worth organizing my behavior around? Your consistency, your boundaries, and your self-possession answer that question more loudly than flirtation ever could. You'll also notice that intentional attention often comes with curiosity. He asks questions that go beyond surface-level facts. He wants to know how you think, not just what you do. He probes gently, sometimes indirectly, into your values, your worldview, your emotional patterns. This isn't accidental. Sexual attraction that has depth is rarely disconnected from meaning. Desire wants justification. It wants to anchor itself to something solid. From a psychological standpoint, this is where attraction begins to move from impulse to investment. Attention becomes a form of preliminary commitment. Not commitment in the romantic sense, but commitment of mental resources. And people are remarkably consistent about where they spend those resources. One of the most telling signs is that his attention persists even when it would be easier to withdraw. When the conversation isn't immediately rewarding, when there's mild discomfort, when things don't go perfectly, casual interest disappears under friction. Intentional attention does not. It adapts, and that adaptation matters. Because attraction that survives friction is qualitatively different from attraction that requires constant stimulation. It's slower, quieter, but far more stable, and it often precedes the more obvious signs people expect: sexual escalation, declarations, pursuit. This is why so many people misread attraction in the early stages. They're looking for volume when they should be looking or direction. They're watching for intensity instead of consistency, but intensity fluctuates. Attention that is intentional tends to endure. There's also something deeply grounding about being the object of this kind of attention. It doesn't feel chaotic. It feels contained. You feel seen without being consumed, desired without being reduced. That balance is not accidental. It's a reflection of how seriously the other person is taking the interaction. And again, this doesn't mean the man is consciously thinking, I am sexually attracted, therefore I will now behave this way. Most of this operates beneath awareness. His nervous system adjusts before his conscious mind catches up. That's why these signals are reliable. They're difficult to fake consistently over time. So if you're trying to understand whether attraction is present, stop watching for performance. Stop waiting for bold moves or dramatic gestures. Start paying attention to where his focus goes when no one is watching. Notice what he remembers. Notice how he adjusts. Notice whether your presence subtly reorganizes his behavior. Because attention is the foundation of everything that follows. Desire without attention burns out. Attention without intention drifts away. But when attention becomes intentional, something meaningful is already forming. And here's the part worth reflecting on. The quality of attention you receive is often shaped by the quality of attention you demand. Through your standards, your boundaries, and your self-respect. If you allow scattered attention, you'll get scattered desire. If you respond to intentional attention with clarity and steadiness, you invite something far more substantial. And that's the real question to sit with, not just who is watching you, but what kind of attention you're willing to accept and what kind of connection you're willing to cultivate. Once AT&T. Attention becomes intentional. The next place attraction reveals itself is in the body, often long before it shows up in language. This matters because human beings like to believe they're primarily verbal creatures. That meaning is created through words, and clarity comes from what is said. But psychologically speaking, the body is older than speech. It evolved to communicate truth before we ever learned how to explain ourselves. And when sexual attraction is present, the body almost always tells the story first. What's important here is not exaggerated gestures or theatrical flirting. In fact, those are often compensations. Real attraction tends to show up in subtler, quieter ways that are harder to fake and harder to suppress. The body responds to desire automatically, and then the mind comes in afterward to justify or restrain it. One of the first things you'll notice is proximity. A man who is sexually attracted to you will unconsciously reduce physical distance. He positions himself closer than necessary. He finds reasons to be in your physical space without overtly invading it. This isn't accidental. Our nervous systems are wired to orient toward what feels rewarding and to pull away from what doesn't. When someone consistently drifts closer, it's because being near you regulates something internally. But proximity alone isn't enough. What matters is how he holds himself in that space. His posture changes. He becomes more upright, more grounded. There's often a subtle tightening through the core, a kind of contained alertness. This isn't aggression, it's readiness. The body preparing itself to be perceived, to be evaluated, to matter. At the same time, you may notice restraint layered on top of that readiness. His movements become more deliberate. He's less sloppy, less careless. He may slow down. This slowing is significant. Desire often accelerates interna. Experience. But when attraction carries weight, people regulate that acceleration. They don't want to overwhelm the moment or expose too much too soon. The body reflects that internal negotiation. Eye contact is another major indicator, but not in the way it's often described. It's not constant staring or exaggerated intensity. It's selective. He holds eye contact a little longer than normal, then looks away, then returns. There's a rhythm to it. That rhythm signals engagement paired with self-control. Too much eye contact can be intrusive, too little can signal disinterest. Attraction often lives in the balance between the two. You'll also notice mirroring. This is one of the most reliable subconscious signs of attraction. He begins to match your movements, your posture, even your speech cadence. If you lean in, he leans in. If you slow down, he slows down. This isn't mimicry in a conscious sense, it's attunement. His nervous system is syncing with yours. That kind of synchronization doesn't happen without emotional or sexual interest. There's also a noticeable change in touch, or rather in the absence of touch. When attraction is present, touch becomes meaningful, and because it's meaningful, it's often delayed. Casual men touch easily. Invested men hesitate. They're aware of the impact of contact and they don't want to misuse it. When touch does happen, it's often brief, contained, and contextually appropriate. A hand guiding rather than grabbing. A brush rather than a grip. Again, restraint is the signal. Breathing patterns can even shift. People often underestimate this, but the body responds to attraction through the autonomic nervous system. Breathing may deepen, speech may slow slightly. There's often a grounding effect, as if the body is trying to stabilize itself in the presence of something significant. This grounding is not accidental, it's the BO. Preparing for connection. What's crucial to understand is that these signals often appear even when the man is trying not to reveal interest. Especially then. The more someone attempts to suppress desire, the more the body leaks information in subtle ways. A foot angled toward you, shoulders turned in your direction, a slight forward lean when you speak. These are orientation cues, and they're remarkably consistent across cultures and contexts. From a philosophical perspective, this is a reminder that truth exists beneath narrative. We tell stories about ourselves, about what we want, what we intend, what we're ready for, but the body operates on a different level. It responds to reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. That's why paying attention to physical signals can offer clarity when words feel ambiguous or contradictory. It's also why people often feel confused when someone says one thing but behaves another way. The body doesn't lie easily. Language does. When there's a mismatch, trust the behavior. Trust the posture, the proximity, the restraint. Those cues are rooted in instinct, not strategy. Now, it's important to say this clearly. Body language should never be interpreted in isolation. One signal means nothing. Patterns mean everything. Anyone can lean in once. Anyone can make eye contact. What matters is consistency across time and context. When these behaviors show up repeatedly without being forced, that's when attraction becomes evident. There's also a relational dynamic at play here. Sexual attraction doesn't just reveal itself in how he moves, it reveals itself in how he responds to your movement. If you step back, does he respect the space? If you lean in, does he become present or withdrawn? Healthy attraction adapts. It doesn't override. It doesn't ignore. It responds. And that responsiveness is critical. It tells you whether desire is paired with awareness. Desire without awareness becomes intrusive. Awareness without desire becomes flat. But when both are present, the interaction feels grounded and alive. This is where your own bodily awareness matters. People often disconnect from their intuition in favor of analysis, but your body is also responding. You feel whether someone's presence is regulating or destabilizing. You sense whether the interaction feels safe or charged in a way that's uncomfortable. Those sensations are data. They're part of the conversation, even if no one names them. What's often overlooked is that sexual attraction, when healthy, carries a sense of containment. It doesn't feel chaotic. It doesn't feel rushed. It feels focused. There's an undercurrent of energy, but it's held. That holding is what allows trust to develop. From a psychological standpoint, this containment reflects emotional maturity. It suggests that the person can tolerate desire without immediately acting on it. That capacity is foundational for any meaningful relationship, whether short-term or long-term. If someone cannot regulate attraction, they will eventually destabilize connection. So when you observe how his body behaves around you, you're not just learning whether he's attracted. You're learning how he handles attraction. Does he respect space? Does he adapt to feedback? Does his presence feel grounding or unsettling? These are far more important questions than whether he flirts overtly or compliments you often. And here's the deeper layer. The way someone handles their body in the presence of desire often mirrors how they handle power. Sexual attraction creates asymmetry. It introduces vulnerability. How someone manages that asymmetry tells you a lot about their character. If he becomes more careful, more aware, more responsive, that's a sign of integrity. If he becomes invasive, dismissive, or performative, that's information too. The body reveals orientation long before values are articulated. So rather than obsessing over what he says, begin observing how he occupies space, how he responds to your presence, how his body negotiates closeness and distance. Those signals are ancient, reliable, and difficult to fake over time, because long before attraction is confessed, before intentions are clarified, before words enter the picture at all, the body has already answered the question, and the most powerful thing you can do is learn to listen, not just with your mind, but with your awareness, so that when desire appears, you recognize it not as noise, but as information, and you choose how to respond with clarity and self-respect once attention has become intentional, and the body has quietly revealed what the mind hasn't yet named. Something more subtle begins to happen. This is where attraction either deepens or dissolves, because real sexual attraction, especially the kind that lasts longer than a moment, doesn't exist in a vacuum. It doesn't float freely, disconnected from character, values, or emotional stability. At some point, desire begins to ask a question, is this safe to move toward? And that's where testing comes in. When a man is genuinely sexually attracted to you, he doesn't just pursue pleasure. He begins, often unconsciously, to assess emotional safety. Not because he's calculating or manipulative, but because attraction introduces vulnerability, desire exposes him, it lowers defenses, and the human psyche responds to vulnerability by seeking structure. This is one of the most misunderstood aspects of attraction, especially in modern dating culture. Testing is often framed negatively as games, manipulation, or power plays. But at a deeper psychological level, testing is simply how human beings orient themselves toward risks. K and sexual attractionists. A risk. It involves rejection, loss of control, emotional exposure, and potential attachment. So he tests not to dominate, but to understand. You might notice this in the way conversations shift. He doesn't just stay in light, agreeable territory. He introduces topics that reveal how you think under pressure, how you respond to disagreement, how you talk about people who've hurt you. He listens carefully to how you describe past relationships, not for details, but for patterns, responsibility, resentment, insight. This isn't accidental. From a psychological standpoint, attraction seeks coherence. Desire wants to attach itself to something stable enough to hold it. So when he probes emotionally, what he's really asking is, can this person handle complexity? Can she regulate herself? Is there a solid core here, or just reactivity? What's interesting is that these tests are often subtle. He may challenge a small opinion. He may tease lightly, not to undermine you, but to see how you respond to mild discomfort. Do you collapse? Do you become defensive? Do you retaliate? Or do you remain grounded, playful, and self-possessed? The response matters far more than the content. Sexual attraction without emotional safety burns hot and fast. Sexual attraction with emotional safety slows down. It becomes deliberate. It becomes selective. And this is where many people misinterpret what's happening. They assume the slowing means loss of interest, when in reality, it often means the opposite. It means the stakes have risen. When a man begins to care about emotional safety, he starts filtering his behavior. He becomes more cautious with words, more aware of impact. He may pull back slightly, not because desire has faded, but because desire has encountered meaning, and meaning requires care. This is also where boundaries become visible. A man who genuinely attracted will notice your boundaries, even the unspoken ones. He watches how you say no. He watches whether your boundaries are reactive or calm, whether they're rooted in fear or clarity. And importantly, he watches whether you respect your own boundaries when there's pressure to abandon them. This is crucial because sexual attraction doesn't just test you, it tests him as well. When desire is present, both people are exposed, and the interaction becomes a negotiation of trust. He's not only asking whether you're safe, he's revealing whether he is. Does he respect limits, or does he push past them? Does he listen when something matters to you, or does he minimize it? Does he adjust when you signal discomfort, or does he override it? These responses tell you far more about the future than any declaration of interest ever could. From a philosophical perspective, this is where eros meets ethos. Desire encounters character, and character determines whether desire becomes destructive or generative. Another layer of testing happens around emotional expression. He may share something mildly personal, not deeply vulnerable at first, but enough to see how you handle it. Do you dismiss it, exploit it, over-intellectualize it, or do you receive it without dramatizing it? People often underestimate how carefully these moments are weighed. Sexual attraction makes people attentive to risk because attachment amplifies consequences. If he senses emotional chaos, unpredictability, or unresolved bitterness, desire often becomes unstable. Not because attraction disappears, but because the psyche recognizes danger. This is why emotional regulation is so magnetic. A woman who can feel deeply without losing herself, who can engage without over-attaching, who can express interest without collapsing into it, that signals safety. And safety doesn't kill desire, it gives, as it's somewhere to land. What's also important to understand is that these tests are rarely conscious. He's not running a checklist. His nervous system is responding to cues. His body and mind are asking whether the connection feels grounding or destabilizing, whether it expands him or fragments him. And again, your response matters more than your perfection. You don't have to say the right thing. You don't have to perform emotional intelligence. What matters is coherence, whether your words, emotions, and boundaries align, whether you are the same person under mild pressure as you are when things are easy. That consistency builds trust. Another sign of this testing phase is that he becomes interested in how you handle independence. Does your life have structure outside of him? Do you have direction, meaning, and responsibility that doesn't dissolve in the presence of attraction? This isn't about dominance or control. It's about sustainability. Attraction that replaces purpose becomes suffocating. Attraction that complements purpose becomes stabilizing. So when he notices whether you abandon your routines, values, or self-respect for attention, he's learning something important. And the irony is that what strengthens attraction here is not accommodation. It's self-possession. There's a quiet confidence in someone who doesn't need to be chosen to feel whole. This is also where many connections fail. Not because attraction wasn't real, but because emotional safety wasn't established. Desire without safety becomes volatile. It oscillates between intensity and withdrawal. Safety without desire becomes platonic. But when both are present, something rare emerges, attraction that can actually last. And this brings us to a difficult but necessary truth. If a man is sexually attracted to you and begins testing emotional safety and the connection fades, it doesn't always mean you failed. Sometimes it simply means the fit wasn't right. Safety is subjective. What feels grounding to one person may feel constricting to another. That's not a flaw, it's information. The goal is not to pass every test. The goal is to remain aligned with yourself while observing how the other person responds. Because the real power in this stage is not in being chosen, it's in chew. Sing wisely. When you understand that testing is part of attraction, not a threat to it, you stop overreacting, you stop performing, you stop chasing clarity through intensity. And instead, you become observant, grounded, responsive rather than reactive. And that shift changes everything. You begin to recognize that attraction is not just about being desired, it's about being trusted. Trusted with emotion, trusted with vulnerability, trusted with potential. And trust doesn't come from perfection. It comes from consistency, from boundaries, from emotional responsibility. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. When attraction deepens, it doesn't get louder, it gets more careful, it asks harder questions. And it invites you not to impress, but tobe, because the strongest connections are not built on intensity alone, but on the quiet confidence that both people are safe to want and strong enough to choose. When attraction has moved through attention, through the body, and through emotional testing, it doesn't remain abstract. It begins to organize behavior. This is where sexual attraction becomes visible not just as interest, but as orientation. And orientation always shows up in action. At this stage, something subtle but profound shifts. His behavior starts to move in your direction. Not impulsively, not dramatically, but purposefully. He begins to position himself as someone who is there, reliable, capable, present. This is often misread as traditional chivalry or outdated gender roles, but psychologically it runs much deeper than that. What you're witnessing is the instinct to invest. When a man is genuinely sexually attracted to you, his energy stops being scattered. It starts to consolidate. He doesn't just want access to you, he wants to matter to you. And that desire to matter changes how he shows up. You'll notice it in consistency. He does what he says he'll do. Not perfectly, not theatrically, but reliably. He follows through. He becomes predictable in the best sense of the word. And predictability here isn't boredom, it's safety. It signals that his interest isn't situational or convenience-based. It's stable enough to organize around. This is where many people get confused, because modern dating culture often frames attraction as excitement, spontaneity, and emotional highs. But excitement alone doesn't build anything. Excitement burns. Orientation builds. And when attraction becomes oriented, it naturally expresses itself as steadiness. Another place this shows up is in subtle protectiveness. Not possessiveness, not control, but awareness. He notices when you're uncomfortable. He notices when something is off. He may step in socially, not to dominate the space, but to support it. He positions himself so that you're not left exposed. This isn't about saving or rescuing, it's about alignment. His nervous system is now factoring you into its calculations. Your well-being matters to him, not as an abstract concept, but as something that affects how he moves through the world. From a psychological standpoint, this is incredibly significant. Human beings protect what they value, they invest in what they see a future with, and they don't do either of those things lightly. Protection and investment cost energy, reputation, and sometimes sacrifice. So when you see these behaviors emerging naturally, without demand, without leverage, that's a strong indicator that attraction has crossed into commitment of resources. What's also important is how understated this often is. He's not announcing it. He's not making grand promises. He's simply there, showing up, adjusting his schedule, making room, not because he's been asked to, but because he wants to. And that desire to make room is everything. Because at this point, attraction is no longer just about you as an individual. It's about how you fit into his life, how the connection integrates with his responsibilities, values, and long-term orientation. He's not just drawn to you. He's considering whether you belong in the structure of his world. That consideration often brings with it a sense of calm. The interaction feels less volatile, less charged with uncertainty, not because desire has faded, but because it has found footing. Desire grounded in purpose feels different from desire floating in ambiguity. You may also notice that he becomes less performative. He doesn't feel the need to impress constantly. He doesn't overstate his value. He lets his actions speak. This is another misunderstood signal. People often think attraction means escalation, more texts, more compliments, more intensity. But when attraction becomes real, it often simplifies. He doesn't need to convince you. He wants to someone you can trust. There's also an ethical component here that's worth paying attention to. When attraction becomes oriented, it comes with responsibility. He becomes more conscious of the impact he has on you. He doesn't want to destabilize you emotionally. He doesn't want to lead you on. And if he senses that his presence is creating confusion or imbalance, he either clarifies or he steps back. This is where character becomes visible, because anyone can feel desire. Not everyone can hold it responsibly. Sexual attraction without responsibility turns into consumption. Sexual attraction with responsibility turns into care. And care is what sustains connection over time. Another sign of this orientation is that he begins to include you, even subtly, in future-oriented thinking. Not necessarily long-term plans, but short-term continuity. Next time, we should. You'd like this. These small linguistic shifts ruffle. A larger internal shift, you're no longer temporary in his mind. And again, this isn't conscious strategy. It's integration. You become part of his mental map. What's crucial here is how you respond, because oriented behavior invites reciprocity, not dependency. If you meet steadiness with chaos, the orientation destabilizes. If you meet care with entitlement, it erodes. But if you meet it with appreciation, boundaries, and self-respect, it deepens. This is why attraction at this stage is less about chemistry and more about alignment. Chemistry can start a fire. Alignment determines whether it warms or burns. There's also something deeply grounding about being desired in this way. You don't feel chased. You don't feel pressured. You feel considered. And being considered is one of the most underrated forms of intimacy. From a philosophical perspective, this is where eros becomes constructive rather than destructive. Desire stops being about consumption and starts being about contribution. He's not just asking, what do I get? He's asking, how do I show up? And that question changes everything. It also gives you information about whether this attraction is something you should accept. Because not all attraction deserves access. Not all desire is safe. But attraction that organizes itself around care, responsibility, and presence, that's worth paying attention to. At this stage, you're no longer guessing. The signals are no longer ambiguous. They're behavioral, they're consistent, they're embodied, and they're costly, which is why they matter. If you find yourself constantly confused, constantly questioning, constantly compensating, it's often because this orientation never happened. Desire remained ungrounded, and ungrounded desire creates instability. But when attraction is real, it simplifies your internal world. You don't have to interpret endlessly. You don't have to chase clarity. The behavior speaks. And here's the deeper insight that ties everything together. Sexual attraction, when healthy, doesn't take from you. It meets you. It doesn't erode your boundaries. It respects them. It doesn't fragment your life. It integrates with it. So the real question isn't just whether he's attracted to you. It's whether his attraction makes you feel more grounded, more clear, and more yourself. Because desire that's worth trusting doesn't pull you off center. It stands beside you and chooses to stay